Hello, and welcome to the Culture Roundtable, brought to you by Culture in Sports, where culture is critical to long-term success. For the past 2 years, Culture in Sports has been educating and influencing organizations, teams, coaches, staff, and even athletes about the importance of culture and leadership in sports as it greatly impacts organizational success, team and athlete performance, and the short and long-term mental, physical, and emotional health of athletes. Leadership and organizational culture is our mantra that culture is critical for long-term success, and we strive to promote these every day. Positively influencing others and educating sports organizations, front office and support staff, and athletes on the impact of leadership and culture is what we work on daily. I'm your host, Jeremy Piasecki. I'm the Executive Director of Culture and Sports and also a panelist for today. And I would like to introduce our Culture Roundtable. The purpose of today's webinar is to discuss a new season. What do athletes, coaches, and parents have a right to expect in the next year of college sports after another offseason of crisis? I would like to now introduce you to our today's moderator, Robert Boland. Robert is a nationally known sports law professor and practitioner and recently joined the faculty at Seton Hall Law after serving 5 years in a first of its kind national role as the athletics integrity officer at Penn State University. He has been a faculty member at several universities for over 20 years. He's also published in several leading law journals and has a book on name, image, and likeness under contract. Bob, please take it away. Bob, you're on mute.
That's a terrible thing. Everybody, we should unmute if we can. You never should mute a lawyer, but it's a pleasure, Jeremy. It's great to be here. On behalf of Seton Hall Law, on behalf of my outside affiliation with Shoemaker, Loop, and Kendrick, the law firm, in their sports practice, I'm pleased to be here and to moderate this group of people. In fact, it's an honor to be here with these people. I have some connection to all of them, and all of them are the best in the business, and they have lived the experience they're going to talk about over the next few minutes, and for the next 60 minutes. I'm going to take a few minutes to introduce them quickly. Carl Ohlson led performance psychology at West Point before moving on to Penn State, where he led performance psychology for athletes everywhere. I think of him mostly as the coach whisperer, the absolute best in the business in helping coaches reach their full potential and have their athletes reach their full potential. And I also think he's the greatest conscience a coach could have too. Chima Okoli, on the other side of my screen, is somebody I had a chance to work with at Penn State in laying down NIL and developing a course in NIL at Boston College, where he still teaches. Chima is a former varsity football player at Penn State. He's also a lawyer, a legal recruiter, and mostly a mentor, somebody who is reaching out to people in the college space and helping them, guide them through the difficult decisions in the college space. Maureen Cooper is somebody I had the pleasure of having an office next to for 5 years. In my time at Penn State, she has an incredible run of experience across college sports throughout most of her life. She's the daughter of a high-level coach. She's married to a high-level coach, and she has 2 Division I athletes as children. So she's lived this. But her role is even more unique than that, because as head of the Pennsylvania Commonwealth Campus athletic program, she's an administrator and the supervisor of 14 athletic directors and campus athletics. So at a unique level of serving more than 1,000 athletes across a number of sports. Maddie Salamone is a lawyer, but former national head of the Student Athlete Advisory Council, a high honor, if you can think of it that way, a graduate of Duke and then the University of North Carolina Law School. She has been working in really cutting edge ways as an advocate for student athlete well-being across the space in college athletics. And we will rock this summer. I think we're going to talk a lot about what we can expect coming into the new year. But so much of what went on in the summer and what's gone on into the season isn't really about the wild economics or the conference realignment in college athletics. It's about the human aspects of college athletics, the interpersonal relationships, the relationship of coach to player, player to institution, allegations that have flown back and forth. And it would be crazy if we didn't start with issues of hazing and culture that have predominated and come out during the summer. Maddie, as an athlete and then somebody who's really working in this space, I'd like to go to you to kind of give me an overview or begin to set an overview of the challenges we have culturally in college sports that you're aware of and working on.
I think what the summer has really exposed is how pervasive those issues are, and that the abuse and mistreatment of athletes is not a rare occurrence within college sports, and that it has everything to do with the culture and how schools have kind of been allowed to sweep things under the rug and not be held accountable. And it's perpetuated the cycle of abuse that exists. And as more of these stories come out, I think what you're seeing is how unsurprised many people are, because those who have a working knowledge of what goes on within college sports knows that these things happen, and that in many cases they're open secrets among everybody on campus, and that there need to be more protective measures put in place that hold people accountable and give athletes an outlet and a place to go and people to trust who can actually help them, instead of being kind of left in the lurch.
That's a great point, Maddie, and I think it's an important one that athletic culture, and particularly the problems that we've heard about at Minnesota and Northwestern this summer, that sort of captured the attention of the country and have led to lawsuits and really they're really problems that lurk on every campus to some degree, that no campus has been immune from them, and no campus really can expect not to have them, and almost need to look for them to some degree. Chima, you were a high level athlete in the college ranks. You went on to the pros for a period of time before returning to law school. Can you speak to your experience as an athlete, and whether cultures could be twisted or turned in a way that would be problematic?
Yeah, most definitely. I think Maddie had a great point. Um, when you get to Division I sports, it's almost as if there is no stop button, right? If you want to be excellent, if you want to be the best, if you want to be XYZ school, your coach is going to get the best out of you. And a lot of coaches can do that without crossing the line of, as we would say, abusing a player. But I think that anywhere you have strata or ranker, Dr. Ohlson and I were talking about military experience. Anywhere you have the lower level coming into a place where there's middle and higher levels, those plebeians, those freshmen, at service academies and shave your head, they want you to know that you are at the lowest level. And if you want to reach this higher level, you must endure. You must take this in order to cross that threshold. And, I'll talk about my experience with a sport like football. You're ingrained to endure and suffer through anything and not complain, right? Because if you complain, that's perceived as weakness. Maybe you're not cut out for this. And even if there's no explicit, hey, this stays in here, it's already ingrained in the culture of get through it because everybody else did. You're not special. And, to talk about situations like Northwestern, Minnesota that we're seeing, it doesn't shock me. It doesn't surprise me. These are all things that are pervasive throughout college sports. And that's why the culture is so important, because culture doesn't change quickly. Culture doesn't change overnight. And oftentimes, if you're just one athlete, you are, and particularly a freshman athlete, well, let's say you're a freshman, you don't necessarily feel like you are one man or woman has the power to change a whole culture. So I love this discussion, and I'm happy to get into it some more.
Well, without diving deeply into transparency, there seem to be some lists of three that go through college athletics: that we have money, we have status and identity, and we have victory as compelling concepts that are out there. But we also have the idea of keeping things in-house, not complaining, and not having anyone to seek or go to seek transparency without fear of retribution. And all of them have sort of collided in a way in this scenario. Jeremy, if you have noticed, that's a pitch that's going right to you as an expert in cultures and cultural recovery. When you put those things together in some sort of intertwined ball of the immediacy of victory, the money and status and identity that goes with being an athlete or being a team member, or being part of a successful program, and then you put it into factors where we don't elevate things, that we don't have a way to pull them apart to some degree, and enduring them is favored. What kind of stew does that create?
Well, you asked a lot of questions that we need way more than an hour to discuss, but it really comes down to people doing the right things for the right reasons. Okay, obviously, universities, colleges, sports at almost all levels, the focus is to win. Winning puts people in the seats. It gets TV revenue, it gets snack bar sales, it provides all sorts of sponsorships and other income into the organization for them to go and make programs better. At colleges and universities, the idea for sports is a extension of education, right? But that's not where it is in the U.S. and especially in the NCAA. So when you have a school and you have an athletic director that's hiring a coach, and the coach is the Division I school going to tell the coach, oh, just make sure academics are first, and sports is just a way for people to relieve stress and to get exercise? No, the whole point is to do the best as possible during the season and during the course over several years. It's to elevate their sports program to a higher level, win a conference or win a championship. And in order to do that, how do you motivate the athletes? There are some coaches who make athletes stakeholders of the process, and they rely on the athletes to help build the program. And there's other coaches who are say as I do and only do what I say. And they're the ones who most of the time are creating a lot of the dysfunction, the abuse, and the toxicity that college sports is enduring today. And the last thing I would like to say before you pass it on to someone else, Bob, is I don't know, through all of my research and just talking with different people in the sports industry, I don't know if abuse and toxicity is actually getting worse. I just think because of social media and the closeness we have as not only communities or the collegiate sports community or the US or even the world as a whole, I don't know if there's actually more toxicity and abuse or if it's just reported more.
It will invariably come out, right? That's the other part that we expose so much more. Mo, I don't know if you feel put upon in any way by the tone of the conversation. You've given your life and a couple of generations of your family have given your life to sport and making it a positive experience. And you lead and counsel a group of athletic directors who do it for at least theoretically all the right reasons, because the incentives of cash aren't there necessarily at a high level. Certainly wealth and power in the Pennsylvania State Athletic Conference isn't the key piece. But how do you personally begin to focus the people who work for you, the athletic directors who report to you, the coaches who work under them? How do you message the modern times to them and in a way that's consistent and keeps them moving forward and engaged?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great sort of question, observation of, being involved with this for such a long time. I think all of the panelists, we all can agree that intercollegiate athletics is just an amazing, amazing experience and opportunity for the most part. I think we've all been connected to it in some way. We all see the benefits that present as a part of being involved in intercollegiate athletics. So I think when we start there, that intercollegiate athletics is an amazing opportunity for young people to grow, explore, continue to do, participate in a sport that they're, passionate about. Your question of what do I do with regard to sort of helping certainly the 14 athletic directors, and then 19 if you include the NCAA Division III athletic directors that are part of the Penn State Commonwealth system. We spend a lot of time sharing what's happening nationally. we look at what's happening from a national landscape perspective, and we share that information with our athletic directors very, very regularly. We let them know what's happening at Iowa with gambling. We let them know what's happening at Northwestern with hazing. And our expectation is that those athletic directors are utilizing that information and sharing that information with their coaches, with their staff, so that they can implement processes and they can implement, I guess maybe to backtrack, we're trying to ensure that that there's a transparency within their campus environment, institutional environment, so that student athletes have an opportunity. They know who they can go to share concerns, share experiences that they're having, so that we as administrators can make sure that it's a positive one. So I hope I sort of addressed, for the most part, what you were trying to say.
You did very well, and you set up my next question to Carl. Carl, you're somebody that both athletes and coaches depend on to source and kind of figure out the right path in what you do. If you were sitting down with a coach going into this season, talking about the risks that they face or the hidden aspects that could kind of damage their team, what would you warn them about, and how would you tell them to avoid some of those pitfalls?
Well, again, that's probably another hour by itself. But fortunately, I can think back on personal experiences over the last several years where coaches had that kind of a conversation with me, which was really remarkable and unsurprising to you, some of our most veteran and most successful coaches. I think one thing that always comes to mind is clarity. And so being super clear with standards, expectations, how we go about business, how we take care of things, what are choices and consequences, and what does that look like? Alignment to the leader's behavior, the leader's way of carrying her or himself. All of that is contagious. And if what coaches say and what they do are completely aligned with the vision and the culture that they espouse, which is not always the actual culture, but when all of those things are aligned, there's no breakdown in the armor there, right? And so then all they have to do is be really consistent, because again, 17 to 22-year-old young adults who see inconsistency are either going to see hypocrisy or they're going to exploit the gaps. So when you have that kind of a consistency, and then the last thing I'll add to that particular question is when you have coaches who don't feel like they got to be perfect, they just recognize that the institutions have surrounded themselves with resources that can be really helpful in processing what they think they're seeing or what they think they want to accomplish and so forth, and being used as a sounding board. I was very, very fortunate that I had a ton of coaches who would use me as a sounding board before I go in front of my team and say this. Help me see how that's going to land. Like what bring another lens to this thing, because I know what I think, but I don't know what they're going to hear. And so, being strong enough and open enough to use resources. How's that for a start?
I think that's a great start. Jeremy, were you going to add something?
Carl, I would like to ask you a quick question. You said you were privileged to have a group of coaches. Can you elaborate on how you got that great group of coaches that were willing to come to you? Like what were you and other people up in the athletic director area doing to create that culture of where coaches were more than willing to come to you and athletes were more than willing to come to you? There was a reason it was happening.
So some of that I don't know, because when I came in, so many of those coaches were in place and had been there for a very long time. What I can say, and there's a couple of moments that really got my attention. I'll go back first when I was just an adjunct faculty member, fall of 2014, and Mo's husband, Rob Cooper, had asked to have a military veteran come talk to his team. Now, we had never met, but a mutual friend of ours brought me over and I talked with the team for a little bit. And at the end of it, he said two things. One, you're always welcome to come to practice, games, whatever you want, be around the guys anytime you want. But 2, there's a stipulation, and that is if you see some way that I can be better at what I do, then you have to tell me. And I left the room thinking, all right, this guy's a Division I head coach with a long history of understanding culture. And he's asking me to provide feedback and input on it. So that stuck with me. I had no idea I was going to be performance psychology professional at Penn State at the time. But then when I interviewed for the job, I talked about how the most important sports psychologist, in quotes, on a team is the head coach, because that person owns the resources, the vision, the plan, the language, everything. And I elaborated on that a little bit. And then our field hockey coach at the time, who is a living legend and a 2-time Olympian, came up to me and said, so you're telling me that if we hire you, you're going to help me be a more effective coach? And I said, yes, in partnership. And she just looked at me and said, I don't care who they hire, I'm working with you. And I left the interview thinking that, okay, that's an N of 2 so far. But then I just kept meeting coaches who, in part, would look left and right and say, oh, wait a minute, a couple of legendary people are asking input from this guy. I want some. And it became the word of mouth. And the other thing that I'd say too about the environment here, and I do believe that over a long period of time, Penn State hired for a particular mentality in their coaches. I don't ever remember walking around campus, which I did every day, multiple times, seeing one coach by himself or herself. You always saw them together. They had lunch together, they met together, they're in the parking lot together. And then if you got close enough to hear the conversation, it was all about helping each other get better. So that to me, those are the indicators that said I was in a special place, and because of their interest in, and the overused term, but it's true, a growth mindset, not being satisfied, wanting to become a better person every day. It was easy to partner with them. And then when you get in front of a team and the coach introduces you as, you know, this is going to be some of our leverage. This is going to help us to be more consistently effective and successful. That opens a lot of doors as well.
Carl, I would be remiss not to kind of put the parenthetical on that, is that I do think the coaches at Penn State were organically desirous to do better, whether they had been hired there, whether they had grown up in that culture. It was one that was good in that way. But we also found at some connection between programs that were winning, taking care of themselves and having good culture, and programs that were struggling to find a footing in that culture. And we'll come back to that in a second. I wanted to go to Maddie here and kind of get back to the main focus of kind of the 3 constituencies that we're really talking about today. And the ones who are the most important in the athletic world. It's athletes, coaches, and parents to a degree. Let's keep the parents out for a minute. Let's have you, Maddie, talk a little bit about the connection between coaches and athletes, and maybe respond a little bit to what Carl just shared about coaches being often lonely or set off and being isolated at times and making mistakes or doing the right thing because they had consistent advice.
Yeah, I mean, I think largely what Carl identified is how a culture, when operating at its best, can bring out the best in everybody there. The fact that you have coaches talking to each other about how do I get better, rather than, you know, kind of letting their ego take over and thinking they know it all, or not being willing to change or listen to somebody who may say, well, I understand why you're saying you want to say this to the team, but actually this is going to be the effect. And I think my experience has taught me as well that there are coaches out there who want to be better, and they're trying to do what they think is right for their team. And sometimes it's just a miss. I think on the other hand, I think you have 2 categories of coaches. You have the ones that really want to be better, maybe 3, ones who are kind of just coasting. And then you have the ones who are truly abusive and maybe a little bit sadistic and actively abusing players. But I think that most of the coaches fall into that. They want to be better. They're trying to do their best. They either don't have the resources, or they don't understand why they're not connecting with the team, or why what they're doing is having sort of a negative effect. And I think that that's where the culture can play a huge role in bringing those coaches on, because, you know, one person can elevate a whole team. And that goes for one amazing coach on a campus who is willing to mentor and bring other coaches in and kind of share their philosophy, can elevate everybody on campus. And I think you did identify a really cool, amazing culture at Penn State. It doesn't exist everywhere, you know, is the fact of the matter. And the same thing goes for just encouraging them in terms of how to interact on teams. I think the same cultural issues exist within teams where you either have a mentality where you're lifting up your teammates, or you have one where you're trying to put them in their place, and you're engaged in a lot of hazing. You're engaged in not, you know, sort of wanting people to experience maybe what you did as a freshman versus changing the team. I think I was on a team where my class tried to change what we experienced when we came as freshmen, but that's not necessarily the norm. At the same time, there are reasons why you have certain measures in place and why coaches allow certain things to go on teams to sort of a little bit put people in their place, because people do need to be part of a team and fall in line to some degree. But I think it is about finding that happy medium. And again, it's part of the culture. What kind of culture do we want to have as coaches, as players? And are we focused on elevating everybody and lifting everybody up? Or is it more about kind of yelling and trying to get your way and telling people what they're not doing right, and sort of trying to put people in place too much, versus kind of lifting people up and realizing that that's really where you're going to be successful, is when everybody working together wants to be better.
Maddie, I think you've posed a question back to Carl, intrinsic in what you said. You talked about coaches who are trying to do their honest best, but they're missing in times. And maybe Carl, would you share your recipe for making those coaches better? And Maddie, could you describe some of those circumstances where they're missing? What those aspects were that you've experienced? And Maddie, why don't you go first and describe coaches who are trying to do a decent job but missing the culture?
I think where coaches miss a lot is when they're trying to motivate, but what they actually do is kind of overly criticize or explain to a team, you would be nothing if I didn't put you in this position or without this sport, and kind of tearing down more than, I think, focused on what is a player doing right, what measurables can they meet and reach, versus focusing on don't ask me about playing time, don't talk about this, don't do that. And I think the lists of don'ts, almost, instead of these are the expectations, here's an evaluation of where you are compared to everybody else. I don't know if I answered your question, but I think that's one example.
That's a good way, because I think it tees up Carl to have that conversation with the coach in facing those questions. How should a good coach kind of parse those challenges? I'm watching Winning Time, and I'm watching Paul Westhead, who's a very good coach, but man, he's saying the wrong things at the wrong time to everybody, and it's fascinating. So Carl, how can we get coaches in a position to both do the right thing and say the right thing in the face of situations and questions that Maddie's articulated?
Yeah, that's so that assumes there is a single right thing. And we know there isn't, because different contexts, different personalities, and so forth. A couple of things that come to mind. One, also, I want to preface this by saying, if you're seeing a coach engage in behavioral language that's less than helpful, it doesn't automatically mean that's a bad coach. Coaches coach how they were coached, unless they were taught something differently. And I've seen very, very good human beings become satisfied that their culture has arrived, and then they took their foot off the gas, and then a couple of years later they look around and it's like, oh my goodness, how did we get here? Right. So this isn't an indictment. However, when I see probably the single biggest behavior that I've seen helpful for coaches is curiosity. Like, if we really want to understand human beings, there's a reason behind every behavior we see. It's easy to judge it. It's a lot harder to understand it. And you're not gonna get to the understanding of that unless you prioritize relationships. And I'm not saying relationships like exchange greeting cards and things. I'm saying authentic relationships where you get to understand the individual as a human being, what makes them tick, what their background is. And so which means there's not a one size fits all approach to the athletes, meeting them where they are, not where you wish they were, walking alongside and doing life with them. It doesn't mean you have to have a soft tone. You can have a firm tone. You want to be yourself, but be curious about what you're seeing, authentically connect, and then again, being consistent, because if you're all over the map and you're in different moods all the time and so forth, and they're just going to create confusion. And then the other thing too, and when you get into the research on what type of feedback do athletes at this level need, typically it's what we would call mistake contingent technical instruction. Like, point out the error, point out what the solution is, what right looks like. Like, nowhere in there do you have to berate somebody for dropping a ball because they already know they did, or making a bad tackle or hitting a ball out of bounds. Right? They already know they made a mistake. Coach the solution versus the problem. And it's amazing to me how often that doesn't happen. Right, because all you got to do is watch a film session. Coach talks the whole time, athletes nod the whole time so they can get out of there, and nobody knows who knows what. But the great ones that got curious about what did the athletes actually just hear, and then they have a conversation. So the athlete ends up doing more of the talking over time and taking more ownership over the learning. When the athlete's learning and the coach is owning the environment for that, really good things can happen. And so that was a really big part of our conversation. Coach, you're not relinquishing your authority. You're bringing people on board with your education of the trade.
Maddie, you're nodding.
Yeah, I think that you touched on some really important points there, where coaches who don't get curious about their players make the mistake of thinking that they can coach everybody the same, and not understanding what drives people and that they need to be spoken to differently. And I think a huge mistake that coaches make is in not making their players feel like they actually care about them as human beings. I think they will always get more from their players when their players feel loyal to them, where they feel like they care about them. And regardless of how much playing time they receive, they know that at the end of the day, their coach wants them to grow and become a successful human being beyond sports. I think that's where a lot of coaches lose people. And another thing you mentioned was, the berating behavior. Players at that level are elite. They know the mistakes they made, and they're going to beat themselves up more than any other person in the entire world could. So really, I think a lot of times a coach needs to actually pick a player up and tell them it's okay, rather than reminding them of what they did wrong, because like you said, they already know.
That's a great point, Maddie. You played at Duke. I went to school and played 2 sports at Columbia. Duke athletes, Columbia athletes might be a handful for their coaches at times because of their expectations and their sense of being right about a lot of things. I found there was some gaps sometimes in the affection that coaches had for athletes. Can you speak to that for a second? Did you experience that there was a gap in understanding the athletes as people? And is that something that can be bridged for anybody on the panel after Maddie goes?
I think I will say that I think it very much varied. I saw some coaches do it extremely well when you knew they had a genuine fondness for their players, and their players had the same back. And then there were coaches who didn't know their players at all. And I think it's really sad if a team of individuals can graduate and feel like after 4 or 5 years, their coach doesn't know them at all. And I think that's always going to create a gap, and it's a lack of fondness. And when times get tough, when there's tough love that's needed as part of coaching, there isn't that understanding necessarily that, okay, the coach is doing this because they care about me. It actually feels the opposite. And so, yes, I think that is part of the culture, is explaining that. Like, you have to put just as much effort into getting to know your players as you do creating a practice plan, as you do watching film, and arguably more so, because you're going to learn your players, and you might have more creative ideas about what to do with them on the field if you understand what drives them.
Jeremy, Carl, I'm going to put a bow on this in a second. but how can coaches show their care? The statement, we can't show you till we care about you kind of statement. How can coaches show that in an organic and real way today that makes a difference?
I'll let you go first, Carl.
I think one, be authentically yourself. Like, you don't want to take on a role and pretend you're somebody because you saw that person was even more successful or whatever. I think when you come back to the communicating with athletes and with entire organizations, whenever you have the time, which actually is more often than people think, take the time to explain the purpose behind what you're doing. And when you are consistently on point with explaining, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, and this is how everything comes together, whether you're talking to one person or entire team or an entire corporation, doesn't matter. When that is part of how you take care of business and you stay true to that, even if you're saying something somebody doesn't want to hear, they'll know that they needed to hear it because they understand the purpose behind it. And then when you get in those heated moments where you don't have time to explain the purpose, you're not going to get questioned as much, because everybody knows whenever you have that time available, you're very clear about this. This is what we're doing. This is why. This is how it comes together. This is the standard. This is what it looks like. And it's just very transparent.
Chima, I'm going to come to you because I've left you quiet for a minute or two. And we can't really look at some of the issues that are out there facing the new season without talking about the change that's swirling around college athletics. That USC and UCLA are now located in the Midwest, and that we don't know how many teams are going to be in the California, and Stanford will be located on the Atlantic coast soon. That hundreds of millions of dollars of contracts are out there. NIL is in the college space, generating at least some money for players more than they had, and maybe less than being reported, but at least it's there. And coaches are making more money than ever at the high level. Chima, I want to come to you as an athlete who played a high revenue sport with high stakes, for whom your play may have made the difference in attending college or not attending college or getting a graduate degree. What are those pressures on athletes right now? What are they like? And talk about the what being an athlete in 2023 feels like for a young player in a revenue sport who's thinking about going pro and may need to be on scholarship to be in school.
Yeah, definitely. As everyone was talking, something really stuck with me, that athletics is changing, but the athlete that the coaches are getting is changing remarkably. Things like the transfer portal, things like the proliferation of social media. There were coaches at universities last year that made one statement, and then players that had graduated 3-4 years ago said, you know what, when I was there, you didn't say that. Here's what you really said. And they call them out on social media. And certain coaches, let's say I've been coaching swimming for 25 years. I love Carl, but if Carl says, hey, change everything you've been doing, he's going to get hit with pushback, because that's what it is to be a coach. This is my life. I've done everything for 30, so coaches have to step back off that platform, because these athletes currently, they're not willing to take certain things that previous generations would be. And then you talk about the pressure and demand. I was lucky enough to play, like you said, in that pressure cooker, so to speak, and you feel it from day one, right? Because now you're the 5-star XYZ. You have people that are contacting you before you step foot on campus talking about, hey, we're 30 generations of, XYZ school, and we know you're the savior. You're the person that's going to lead us to the national championship. And God forbid you throw an interception in a big game. Now all of a sudden you have multitudes of people coming at you, calling you everything but a child of God. That's the reality every single day, right? Everybody remembers Chris Webber, the Final Four. Maybe that's, the timeout they didn't have. People from alums still call them today, right? Because it means that much to them. And then you add on, well, hey, certain people are putting money on your performance, whether you know about it or not. There's a ton of pressure. and that leads to a ton of anxiety. And the way your coach handles you and the way your coach deals with you can either exacerbate that or say, hey, look, focus on me, right? As you said, I have that affection towards you. Here's what I need from you. There's a lot of unspoken anxiety and unspoken angst that goes on with playing in front of 100,000 people in the stadium and 1 million people on ABC. I remember the very first time that my buddy says, hey, man, you're on ESPN. I almost couldn't believe it, right? Because you grow up thinking that this is where you're going to be, but so few actually make it. And so if you're fortunate enough to make it, you carry the expectations of your family, you carry the expectations of the alumni base, you carry so many things with you silently as a 17, 18-year-old when you first get there. And no one really helps you unpack that except when you drop a pass or you miss a tackle or you miss a block, right? That's when you get your corrective action. So I think that coaches now are embracing the things that we're discussing, not because they all necessarily want to, but because you have to. You cannot conduct yourself in the same manner that you once did. And if you do, as we're seeing, slowly but surely, it will become public. And when it does, another thing that we're seeing is the universities often aren't prepared for the PR nightmare that it's going to be. And we get kind of this, half-hearted, we're sorry, but hey, look, this is our football coach, our basketball coach, someone who holds outsized influence on campus. How do you address this person that brings you XYZ amount of revenue and say, hey, coach, you've done wrong. Your players are unhappy. So there's a bunch of things. There's a bunch of things to unpack there.
That's a lot to unpack it, but you're exactly right. And Mo, we've had a lot of conversations outside of this, and feel free for anyone kind of after Mo kind of gives her response to jump in. But a couple of the common factors that I think we can extrapolate out of the Northwestern case or challenges at Minnesota or other things are, it feels like the team culture had been off for a period of time, particularly for athletes in a postgraduate setting. And if you're going to clean up or be aware, one of the things I'm suggesting to people is you need to go back and survey and be in contact with your athletes who have graduated, and particularly with those who leave teams, because a lot of what I think we're getting now is retrospective lawsuits, retrospective claims, things that aren't necessarily in our ability to fix anymore, but things that we can manage or have a better sense of because we're in better contact. I also think we need to talk about coaches to some degree in the exercise of their power. That's one of the really more difficult things that we're dealing with. Mo, you've got all kinds of coaches who are giving their time for all the right reasons. You've got a diversity of sports that work under you. You've had experience at a million levels, and we'll get into your experience as a parent as well in a second. But how do you talk to coaches now about the reality of the modern athlete and building a team culture inside of this complexity and this kind of storm that's going around college athletics?
Yeah, okay, just to maybe go back to a minute into what you just said.
Yeah.
I think that when you talk about surveying athletes and having athletes coming to a point where they decide to sue an institution based on the experience that they had several years ago, I think what we're finding is, as we see more things becoming public, then it offers an athlete and a family member to say, wait a minute, that actually sort of a similar thing did happen to me. And so I do feel it's important for me to come back and say, look, this is wrong. This shouldn't have happened. So I think as almost every single one of the panelists has suggested at some point in their comments, that the public aspect of things has just amplified the exposure to experiences that student athletes are having. So I think that, we always need to be cognizant of the experience that our student athletes are having. And so when we talk about what do we do with how do we share the information with our coaches, the thing that we do is we are absolutely surveying student athletes at the end of each year. Whereas, several years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, we might have surveyed the athlete for their experience once every 4 years. Now it's a requirement. We do it every year. And then we share those results with our coaching population, with our the institutional administration, so that they know what is happening, what the experience is on campus, so that they can make adjustments if necessary. I find that again, I think Maddie touched on it. Carl touched on it. There's a personal interaction, obviously, between coach and student athlete, and we have many coaches that have that old school mentality, and that is just not acceptable anymore. What they experienced as coaches, as players when they played, we've evolved, and if you're not going to evolve, then you're probably not going to be in the profession very long.
Mo, let me ask you a quick question. If they coach like they did 20 years ago, but they're winning national championships, where does the organization and the athletes, where do they stand? Would they prefer to win a national championship, even though the coach is toxic and abusive, or and the organization gets all this money? Or is the organization and are the athletes ready to say, okay, this is not a great fit, let's find a coach who will help us win that national championship, but the treatment is a lot better, and the interaction, and that athletes actually feel like stakeholders?
Chima, that may be closer to your work too, so feel free to chime in on this one. Go ahead, Mo, if you want.
I was just going to say very quickly, I think that there's certainly the tolerance level might be a little higher on as far as how I'm treated if I'm winning, if my team is winning. But I think overall, if there's a really toxic environment and a pervasive environment of mistreatment, that's absolutely, nowadays, that's going to bubble up to the surface, and it's going to have to be addressed. As an administrator, I feel like that there's not an opportunity to tolerate the behaviors that we have seen in the past, because administrators are losing jobs, administrators are being sued, administrators are being held accountable for the actions of those that are underneath them. So while I do think that there's, again, the tolerance level for how I'm going to be talked to or how I'm going to be treated might be a little bit higher if I'm on a national championship team, it's not going to be that case. It's not that way for everybody, and it will be exposed. And how is it managed?
And quickly, unfortunately, now, right?
Correct.
Or maybe fortunately, that it will happen more quickly.
Correct.
With the movement of players, with NIL. The idea that these things will come out and will come out quicker is just the reality. Maddie and Chima, I called upon you to give an athlete's perspective. Would you trade winning for culture in any way? And or is that even a realistic issue anymore?
Go ahead, Maddie.
Maybe, okay. I was going to say it may take away some of the sting, but I think that coaches have a tremendous power to really take away an athlete's first love. And I think that has a far more detrimental effect than, you can have a national championship, but if it took away your love of a game that you dedicated your whole life to, I don't think that makes up for it. And I think those are certainly the coaches that historically have gotten away with bad behavior for much longer. But I think what also happens at schools is that the coaches who are not in the spotlight as much can also get away with more. And historically, the problem with some of the athlete exit interviews is that they stay in-house. And so it's a determination by the administration of whether or not they're going to
If they're even read.
If they're even read. And if the person who's reading them has the power and authority over whatever coach to actually do something about it. And the majority of the time, nothing happens. I think there's an interesting dynamic with, current and former athletes, where when you come out and you speak out against a coach, there is always going to be somebody on your team who is abundantly, indebted feeling to the coach. right? And that they're going to sing praises no matter what happened on the team. And so when you speak out, you're always, I think, facing this, who's gonna come out of the woodworks and sing their praises. You also are jeopardizing, your future network by being so vocal, even years later, and saying negative things where, former teammates may not want to come out and talk about it, or you kind of ostracize the people that you felt close with among, athletic staff. And so I think there are a lot of complicated issues when it comes to speaking out. I think with more athletes now coming out publicly and being believed, you may see a turn in the tide there. But I mean, there have been headlines over the last decade with entire teams coming forward with the same story, which actually is pretty unusual. And then the school immediately kind of bands together and tries to pull any former athlete who really will sing the praises of the coach. And a lot of times these coaches stay in their position because it's easier.
Maddie,
Sorry, Bob.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Chima.
No, sorry. I just wanted to follow up this really quickly, just to give my experience. It matters if the coach is winning, if they're bringing the university revenue and glory and prestige. When you have a winning big revenue sport team, grades are up, the hotels make more money, the mom and pop restaurants surplus revenue. So especially in a college town, it's more than just sports. And Maddie pointed out a great thing, and sorry to jump down your throat, but I had to get this out. There's a huge power imbalance between player and coach. We're not colleagues, we're not equals, we're not friends. And prior to 10 years ago, no transfer portal, no easy out, there's no NIL. So if I don't like you, or you have done something that I deem unsatisfactory, not only are you not going to play, but your next 4 years here are going to be hell on earth. So I think that coaches understand now that the light can be shined more on what they do, but winning cures all ills. And it also affords you an outsized amount of influence. There's certain coaches that are, head coach / athletic director, but the athletic director part is silent. You get what I mean? And you're just one little athlete. And as Maddie said, if you're a whistleblower at Boeing or at Coca-Cola or at Nike, kiss all of the perks goodbye that you have earned via your good service. You're going to be seen as, a non-friend of the organization, even if it's silently.
And that was where I was going with it, is that organizations are quick to land on those people to silence it, even when it's not that critical. It's kind of a remarkable thing. I have 5 minutes left, and we haven't talked about the parents' constituency. And we have some athletic parents to talk a little bit about that in their own experience. But if you talk to any coach or any athlete, parents really are a bigger partner today in this process than they've ever been, both for good and bad at times. Can we talk to parental expectation in the college environment? What should they be doing? What shouldn't they be doing? How involved should they be in this process, and what they could reasonably expect? And we have exactly 3 minutes to do that.
I can share one thing, and that's get on the front end of it fast, right? So it costs more to be involved in sports than it ever has before. Parents are more connected than they've ever been before. They want a return on their investment, which it is an investment to get your kid up to, to the collegiate levels. They are going to be involved whether you want them to or not. Therefore, to the extent possible, have a philosophy, stick to it, communicate it over and over again during recruiting, during signing, and then you're recruiting them again for the next 4 years to try to keep them, right? So communicate. And as new information comes available, or you learn some new things, or you have tweaked standards or whatever it is, just be consistently communicating, because you're still going to get beat up, but you're not going to get beat up as much if you're consistent and you're telling them exactly what's going on and why.
And I think too, just focusing on having a less combative relationship and recognizing that the parents have every right to be concerned about their child, and that a coach makes a big promise when they drop them off on campus that they are going to take care of them. And many coaches fail. And so that's, I think, it goes to the communication piece. If the parents feel heard and they feel like their kid matters to the coach, it goes a long way compared to feeling like their child is being hung out to dry. And you know, that's going to get any parents back up.
Mo?
Absolutely. Would echo what was just said by both Carl and Maddie. I mean, the expectation is that the understanding is that participating in high level athletics is anxiety inducing. There's a ton of pressure. And so as a parent, I have an expectation that the coach or somebody within the circle around my children is going to have an opportunity to offer resources to my child when problems arise, because problems are going to arise. They will present. They will. It's a function of young people growing up. And so if the coach is not able to offer that resource, which they should be trained and educated on how to share the resource information, then there better be somebody that's a part of the program that is offering the resource to my children to where do they go when they're struggling. And as a collegiate administrator, athletic administrator, I have that expectation that you know, the 2,500 student athletes that participate throughout the state of Pennsylvania with Penn State University athletics, that they know where they can go if they're struggling. And if we're not sharing that, then we are failing our athletes on our campuses.
I would love to give you each a last word, but we don't have time. I'll give you the word of thanks. My heartfelt thanks for coming in, contributing your experience, the lives that you've led in this space, and the enlightenment that each of you have to share with all of our constituents. This is such an important topic because I think so many times it will end with bad expectation. And I think that's the key, that the collegiate athletic experience is important because it leads to graduation and transformation in education, not necessarily a particular outcome on a field, on a court, and in a game. And if it has great outcomes, all the better. But if it has bad outcomes, there's a lot of learning and a lot of goodness from that if we treat each other well in that circumstance. Thank you all, each of you, Chima, Mo, Maddie, Carl, Jeremy, for your input. I'll turn it back over to Jeremy in Culture and Sports, and thank everybody for listening.
I would like to echo what Bob said. This was an amazing discussion. And of course, I'd like to thank each of you for your incredible thoughts and contribution to this roundtable. I'd also like to thank all of the attendees because of your desire to be better leaders and to have a better organizational culture. If you want to learn more about what we do at Culture and Sports, our different programs, or this Culture Roundtable, please visit us at cultureandsports.com. Have a great day.